Hey, welcome to Occam's Razor, where we do things fast and loose and get straight to the point. So let's get on to our first thing, tracking. I can't believe this come out. Here we have Detectives Sergeant Peter Merrifield and Detective Paul McNamara, retired. There is an interview that Northern Perspective has done with these two members because no one else has interviewed them. And the frustration that they are doing has is beyond. It's beyond. Sorry, I had some noise in my headphone. I lost my train of thought. What a way to start a first podcast. All right. So these names that they have here, this entire caucus, all these people that have been doing questionable decisions, right? So basically, what they're doing is that they're bringing into question how these politicians have managed their oath. Have they followed their oath to Canada? Well, it is obvious here that from the evidence that they have given, they haven't. And the evidence that they've presented, as they've discussed in their interview with Northern Perspective, is that all this evidence is easily available if you just ask the courts for it. Now, I always like to do a bit of a comparison with the Canadian Armed Forces when we look at these people in the government, because the government does a lot of decisions when it comes to people that work for them, never hold themselves up to the same accountability. So just imagine if a commander in the Canadian Armed Forces in a position of authority, who would be like a minister in these documents, if they violated their oath, what kind of punishment would they be subjected to? Well, a commander in the Canadian Armed Forces is obviously going to be in charge of their own department compared to a minister, right? They're going to have a ship, they're going to have a unit, they're going to have a wing, they're going to have a squadron, a regiment. They're going to be in charge of something. They're going to be a commander and they have responsibilities. But what these two detectives, when they went through this evidence and found these things that the government has refused to take care of, the commander in the armed forces had done such a thing, uh, improperly forsakes the station. You know, just that very last one there. You have forsaken your oath. You've forsaken your station. Improperly withdraws from action. Well, in this case here, they have evidence that proof was given to politicians and they refused to act on it. So it's very simple. We don't have to go very far in comparison to what our current ministers and all the other ministers for the last 9 years in the Liberal Party have not done or done, compared to how they expect the rest of the public service and the RCMP and the military to comport themselves. Rules for thee, but not for me. That's basically the lesson of this entire document that these detectives have put together. And the mainstream media is not covering this, right? This is being left up to podcasters and it's just not gaining any traction. You know what else isn't gaining any traction in the media? Is this story here. Well, it is gaining a little bit. Some of the mainstream media have been dealing with this story, but we'll see how far it gets. As long as the outrage continues, this story will stay alive. But if it doesn't, it'll just vanish from the news feed like all the other ones. And by now, you must know the story about Natasha Graham, who was assaulted by the police during an arrest. And it's very evident from what happened here is as we've seen throughout several protests in Canada, where the cops will protect the violent protesters and arrest peaceful bystanders and peaceful media, independent usually on the side, just recording it because it's easier for the cops to deal with uh, law-abiding citizens and arrest them rather than dealing with the violence that happens on the streets, right? It's a lot easier for a thug, like we've seen in this video, to put his hand on his hip of a woman so that she has a reason to touch him and take that hand off her hip and then use that as an excuse to arrest him for assaulting a police officer. Pretty sketchy. But we've seen these kind of tactics all the way through. And it's, of course, we have Rebel here that helped Natasha set up a GoFundMe page because we've seen how Rebel media reporters have also continually been assaulted. It's outrageous the amount of physical harm that has been done to David Menzies, the reporter of media over the years, by these thugs and police themselves being thuggish behavior. And of course, they've been doing their legal recourses and suing the police as a result of these assaults, and they just don't seem to learn. This is happening all across Canada in all the large centers. We've seen it in Ottawa. We've seen it in Montreal. We've seen it in Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto. And shout out to Mad Lab Press. Keep doing what you're doing. Fine. Here's Natasha's post X feed. Give her a follow. She deserves it. Independent reporter. Um, what she went through, it'll be interesting for the rest of us to keep following the story and give her our support. And Joe Warmington, when we talk about the mainstream media covering things, Joe is the only one really who paid much attention to this other than indie media. And he actually did a bit of an interview here and he broke it down for her. Should be probed. She's not a criminal and should not be treated as such. It's not supposed to be an authoritarian state here. And if it if there is tolerance for anti-Semites to do what they do, there should be for those legally filming them. This is what she told me in DM. This is Joe Warmington speaking. Thank you for your support. I got home not long ago from the hospital and haven't slept in 31 hours and have basically been crying on and off in a shock. I'm bereft. He put his hands on me. They were wrenching me when I was on the ground. I thought they would seriously injure me. I thought they were going to dislocate my shoulders. He assaulted me again in the cop car, pretending to do up my seatbelt. And when my hands were behind me in cuffs, I was kicking the chair in front of the other cop to help me. He pretended nothing was happening. The cuffs were so tight, my right hand went numb. What happens is very wrong, and when I have rested and am less afraid, and after I speak to a lawyer, I will post a short comment. These are the cops today. What kind of oath are they taking? Are they taking an oath to protect and to serve? Are they there to serve the community? Or are they there to serve their political ideological masters? Because it seems very much more as the days go on that it is the latter of what I said and not the first. Alexandra Lavoie, another reporter for Rebel News, she does great work. She here takes Mr. Francis Pilon to task, where in his article following this assault that Natasha suffered, he basically blames the victim. Well, that's pretty well what all the far left do, is they always blame the victim, especially if it's for their ideological narrative. On to freezing bank accounts. Well, we thought this was over with, but it's not. It's still going on. This PPC candidate who had left Canada during the COVIDity stupidity, because we all saw the totalitarian half-wittery going on in Canada, and she moved to Mexico. And now finally there was an election coming up where there might be a chance to remove these totalitarian, authoritarian, liberal party people who want to confiscate your guns and tell you what to eat and where to live and how to live and how long you need to live before you're offered medical assistance in unaliving. Yeah, so finally she decided she'd throw her hat back in the ring. And then no sooner does she try to access her bank account that apparently it's been frozen. So this has been frozen for one of three reasons. A, as Vancity said, it was it was under government orders. So why is the Liberal government deciding to freeze bank accounts of their political opponents? Uh, I can't believe this is happening in Canada today. Or uh, the person who put the notations in Vancity is doing it on its own, on their own, and Vancity has nothing to do with it, and they're just doing it on their own. Or uh, they did it on their own, and Vancity found out afterwards and have decided to stay quiet because they agree with it. So it's actually the government that did it, or it's Vancity that authorized it, or it's just an individual in Vancity who did it on their own. And of course, the day after they froze the bank account, they went on vacation, and thereby nobody in Vancity can give answers to a federal political candidate during an election why they froze their bank account when they've been told the Liberal government froze their bank account. Very, very sketchy. Now, if you go into Google and you just do a news search for, you get nothing. You get nothing, right? Because this story does not exist in Alphabet News. Now, if you do a search in Google and Yahoo News, well, then you'll actually start getting some stories. Now, if you go to the news, probably nothing. Yeah, nothing. But if you do a search and all you get this, you do a search in Google, you only get this, well, you only get Megan's story. You don't even get the other international stories that are covering it. Isn't that strange, eh? News agencies outside the country are covering the PVC candidate having their bank account frozen. They're not doing it in Canada. What does that tell you about state control over the media? Absolutely incredible. Now, here is Vancity. They may or may not have actually decided to participate willingly in freezing a bank account as ordered to by a government that is telling them to do so to cancel a political opponent. This doesn't look good for Vancity. I'll tell you that. And Mark Carney. Now, what's he doing today? Well, I can tell you what he was doing a couple of days ago. Once again, he was offering more stuff for the armed forces. And none of it is going to be any good for us because of the way they're still treating the Canadian Armed Forces members. You got to remember that during the COVIDity stupidity, they made everybody take the jibby jab. And now that they have, and those that are injured and have been unalived, they are denying them duty of care. In fact, they're still required to get 3 jibby jabs when you join. So anything and everything that this guy is offering to rebuild the armed forces after they've just destroyed it or rebuild anything else that they've just destroyed for 9 years is not going to happen. So now we'll just finish off with going through my daily friendly website that I go to. It's a really good news aggregate. I suggest everybody go there. Blazing Cat Fur. If you really would like a daily venue of what's interesting stories with a slight right-wing twist to it, Blazing Cat Fur is a pretty good place to go. Green Party dropped from leaders debate, not running enough candidates. Well, we know Elections Canada has been pretty finicky and always changing their minds on who's allowed to be in a debate and who's not. In fact, most of it never makes much sense at all. I think if you're able to field candidates throughout Canada, 90% of the ridings, you should be allowed to participate in the debate, regardless of what your participation was in the last election, or if you actually have a sitting candidate in Parliament. These rules that they make up only makes it more difficult for new political parties to begin to start. Because imagine this, you would have to start a brand new party, run 90% candidates throughout Canada and all the, what's more than 338, was it 343 ridings now? And then after that election, you would have to wait till the following election to make sure you meet the percentage requirements of participation of people who voted for your party. And then he would have to run, of course, through Canada again in 90% of the ridings to participate in the debate. And that's if they don't change the rules from the last election, like they did this time with the PPC. Because the last election, they told them, "Oh, you don't have 5% of the vote. You can't join," or whatever the percentage was. But they met that percentage after the election. So then, come this election, they said, "Oh, yeah, we're going to change that percentage now. You need to meet this percentage." So you cross this line, you die. No, no, you cross this line, you die. No, 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 wait. You cross this line, you die. It's that kind of thing. China would lose a trade war with the US gradually, then suddenly. I think we're seeing it already. Their ships, I believe, are being turned around. A lot of ships are showing up at port to dump off their cheap Chinese goods. But now with the tariff disputes, those ships are turning around and going back. So a lot of the cheap stuff that the United States was getting, that all the people who've been impoverished by decades of far left financial policies that has stripped the US of its industrial base, all those people living on subsistence living, buying cheap Chinese goods, are going to find it a little harder now because they're not going to have those cheap goods anymore until the United States starts rebuilding its infrastructure, turning on its industries again, giving people more jobs, having them more disposable income, and then eventually things will start to even themselves out. But firsthand, there's going to be some pain, and everybody knew this pain was going to be there. And in fact, the people were counting, the people who implemented all of these policies over decades that destroyed industry in the West. For whatever scam it was. Oh, we need to save the planet, so we need to destroy industries and move them to other places on the planet. So, because apparently those industries there will destroy the planet, according to their schemeries. So, as a result, they make things so difficult that if you try to change it just a little bit, people feel the pain and then they react badly and then they vote differently. So I think after decades now, people have learned a little. Well, in south of the border, they have. Here in Canada, everyone is still brainwashed by the government-funded mainstream media. Uniparty disagrees, or sorry, Uniparty agrees not to discuss immigration and English debate. Yes, that's right. The number one thing that has completely hammered Canada since the COVID stupidity has been the unfettered mass immigration, which has stressed every social system that we have in Canada. It's just the amount of people they let through the border. There was no way to effectively screen them because it would have taken. They only had 1.5 seconds per person for the amount of people that let through. Given the amount of people that work in immigration that do that job, they would have had 1.5 seconds. That's it. So it's just stamp, 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 stamp. They're just letting people through. So as a result, we've seen what's happened in Canada. Everything is stressed. Crime is out of control. Social systems are broken. You know how long it takes to get a doctor these days? That's because there's too many people and far fewer doctors, which also started because of the COVID stupidity, breaking our medical system and a lot of the business at the same time. This was all planned. You do the COVID stupidity, you bring in a bunch of mass immigration, complete breaking down the system, and throughout the whole thing, you brainwashed everybody, made everybody live in fear, so that they react to everything. Bad man, orange man bad. This guy says mean things. I need to react. I need to react all the time. Nobody takes the time to understand and think. Nobody does any of that. You know, liberals are ensnared by dirty politics. Yeah, right. We see that every bloody day. You just need to go back through and look at all the scandals within Parliament, none of which seem to be much of an issue during this election here. They could be bringing up all that stuff, but they're not doing that at all. Russia's forces aren't as strong as they claim, say captured Chinese fighters. Why aren't we asking the Chinese fighters about the Chinese strength? Why isn't he talking about that? If you made it to the end, thanks for hanging out. We'll do this all again tomorrow. Well, hopefully a little better. Talk to you later. Bye.